Hello, it's Samantha Nolan-Smith here for Tuesday morning chat. We had a couple of weeks on holidays and then something odd was going on with Facebook where I think maybe they were changing some of their settings because we just could not do a live video for a week or two there. Anyway, I'm back. So today we're talking about what has taking responsibility got to do with it. And I don't think that I'm saying anything surprising when I say to you we are currently living in a world where outrage and blame are two of the prevailing states of being in the world. I'm particularly talking about the Western world, but I'm pretty sure what I have to say extends beyond that. And so we have this situation where people are speaking up about things that are frustrating them or annoying them. It's creating outrage by other people saying, how dare you speak up? There's a lot of blames being slung around. And what I want to suggest in amongst all of that is something that's really important, and that is who is taking responsibility for anything on our planet at the moment. And this has got some complexity to it because you have to understand how the structures of power work in order to understand where it's appropriate to take responsibility, even if you don't feel personally responsible. So, and also where you might be taking responsibility inappropriately. So let's start with the former. Remembering that we live in a world which privileges certain people and doesn't privilege others. Privileges certain people because of their gender, privileges certain people because of their race, privileges certain people because of their physical abilities, privileges some people because of their sexuality, privileges other people because of their class, their economic status. So when you remember that that's happening, and that everybody's at an intersection of those points. So it's not like anybody's saying, you've got that level of privilege, therefore your life is amazing and you've got no problems. Nobody's saying that. So please don't misunderstand the use of the word privilege. They're saying this kind of existence, so the fact that you have white skin means that you have skin privilege, by which they mean when you walk down the street, you can walk down a street in an English-speaking Western world, in the English-speaking Western world particularly, and you don't get harassed. Police don't kind of look at you and check you out and assume that maybe you're about to commit a crime. You don't walk into a supermarket and have the security guards following you because they assume you're about to do something dodgy. So that's the kind of privilege we're talking about. And when you live with that kind of privilege, you become blind to the fact that other people aren't experiencing that. And then when other people start to speak up and say, hey, we don't have the same experience as you here, what's not happening is people saying, oh, really? And what responsibility can I now take for that fact? And what can I do to support a change? What can I do to initiate a change? What we do instead is we go, how dare you tell me I'm privileged? How dare you think that my life's perfect? Blah, 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 blah. And so we go on the defense rather than looking at educating ourselves, looking at the data, looking at the condition of people's lives in the world and recognizing a blind, you would have to be I was about to say a blind person, then I thought, no, that's horribly ableist. Forgive me for that. I'll take responsibility for that. Absolutely. You would have to be completely ignoring every bit of information that's out there to not come to the conclusion that white people have a level of privilege in the English-speaking world that the people of color, Indigenous people, BIPOC. BIPOC is the acronym if you're not aware, which means Black Indigenous people of color. that they're not experiencing. So what do you do as a white person about that? Because it can feel confronting to be told you're benefiting in ways that I'm not. You can go down the outrage path, but it doesn't serve anybody for you to do that. What you can do is recognize I'm not being personally attacked here. It takes a level of emotional maturity. I'm not being personally attacked. My entire race, if you want to call different colors races, my entire race has experienced a level of privilege that other people haven't. And some people within my race have deliberately argued for that to be the case. Now, I find that personally offensive that people would do that, and I feel a level of shame about the way white people have behaved in the world. But now I have a choice. Right now, today, I have a choice. I can either wallow in shame and do nothing. I can deny what's patently obvious to everybody. What is the fact? What is a fact of life? I can deny it, or I can say, I'm sorry that my group of people have behaved in that way. What can I do now to stand beside you and look to the future and change the future? And then one of the things that people are invariably going to say is educate yourself, understand what's really going on, understand how the system works, create space for other people's voices, use your platform to speak up about these things. So these are just some of the simple ways you can take responsibility. But I'm suggesting that the very first thing is to say, I take responsibility. So right now, I'm going to give you an example of how that works. I'm a non-Indigenous Australian. I take responsibility for the behaviour of non-Indigenous Australians on this land. And the behaviour has been disgusting. And the behaviour has been appalling. The behaviour has been murderous. And the behaviour continues to be racist. And the behaviour continues to significantly disadvantage Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I take responsibility for that. That doesn't mean I'm saying I'm personally responsible. We live in this idea that there's one person that's personally responsible for all the bad things. So when I learned about World War II, there was a massive focus on Hitler, that it was all one person, Hitler, that caused the Holocaust. Hitler was one of millions of people who were involved in creating the Holocaust, in the sense of there was the focal point. He was massively important to influencing the way people thought. But then there were all the Nazis, and then there were all the people who said nothing, and then there were all the people who didn't actively speak up, who maybe just mumbled amongst themselves about this isn't right, but didn't actively speak up. That's a lot of people. So when you say I take responsibility, you have to recognize that there is never just one person responsible for systemic inequality. It's either generational, it's a full gender of people, it's a full race of people, whatever it is, all of whom are benefiting in some way from the inequality, and who are choosing to do nothing about it, to not take any responsibility for it. So that's one side of the coin is, can you, in your privilege, choose to be different to 90% of the people who are in your class of privilege, and show them how to take responsibility without an assumption that suddenly it's all one person's fault? Can you show them how to say, I'm now taking responsibility for the state of the world today, and I'm going to now move forward from there? Because the way that you know whether there's something to take responsibility for is you look at the consequences of a set of beliefs. So when let's talk about gender and abortion for a minute. Women always take responsibility for pregnancy. Always, every single time, because we don't have a choice. It's in our body. It's happening in our body. Pregnancy is happening in our body. So what we choose to do with that is taking responsibility for pregnancy. We might choose to have the baby, take the pregnancy to term. We might choose to have an abortion. We might end up with a miscarriage, whatever. But we know we're fully responsible for that. What is the problem with the abortion debate is that the other people who are also responsible for pregnancy are not taking any responsibility. They're punishing the people who are taking responsibility, and they're making it very, very hard for women to make a responsible choice for themselves. But if you imagine a world where all the men, not just some, all the men say, I'm equally, as a gender, my gender is responsible for families, is responsible for pregnancy, is responsible for a woman's health and well-being. And the way that we will take responsibility for that is that we will create space for women to tell us what they need. We will see if we can allocate resources to whatever they say they need, because it's their bodies and it's happening to them. And we will then also accept responsibility for the consequence of actually having a child. So we will then look at the full life of a human being, because that is a part of taking responsibility for my sperm and whatever happened with my sperm. But we don't debate it like that. We debate it like in this kind of moral vacuum. And the people who need to be at the table saying, my guys, me and all the guys on the planet, we're not taking enough responsibility for childcare, for women's health while they're pregnant. We're not taking enough responsibility for the economic conditions of women, so that they can take, if they're going to be, which is the current situation, the primary caretakers of children, they're going to be economically secure not just then, but when they retire, because the consequences of not being economically secure when you're looking after children is you find yourself in poverty when you're 60, 70, 80 or 90. We're going to take responsibility for all these things because we are responsible for this situation. So you look at the consequence of your belief. And this happens in abortion all the time. The belief that the anti-choice movement says is women shouldn't have abortions, and the consequence that we know when we look at the data is that does not stop abortions. Making abortions illegal doesn't stop abortions. What it does do is it kills women, because women continue to have abortions. They just have unhealthy abortions. They don't receive proper medical treatment. So when you're willing to look at that and say, my anti-choice belief, the consequence of that is the death of women, maybe you're willing to do that, because some in the anti-choice movement are willing for that, because they would rather women die than a fetus die. As long as they're willing to take responsibility for that, there is not really much we can do about that. We just have to let those people live over there in their misogynistic land. But the rest of the population, will, when it starts to think about taking responsibility and the consequences of taking responsibility, you can start to see a shift. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is the flip of that. And the flip of it is that when you're on the underside of privilege, when you're not receiving the privilege, then you often are expected to take responsibility for the privileged. You're expected to solve the problems that you're raising with the privileged. So this happens all the time in race discussions where let's say a person of color is speaking to a white person, and the white person hasn't really thought about race before, and they get into a conversation about race, and then the white person expects the person of color to educate them, to take the time out to work them through the resistance that the white person is invariably going to feel when they hear that they're actually part of a very racist society and they're benefiting from that, etc., etc., etc. Now, it is never the responsibility of that person, the person of color, to walk the white person through that. The white person, because they see the world through the lens of privilege, will assume somebody is supposed to help them with that. So, two things. If you're the privileged, go and find another privileged person to help you through it, is my first suggestion. Somebody who's already done the work. But the second thing is, if you're not benefiting from the privilege, then do not take responsibility for things that are not your responsibility. The whole world will tell you it's your responsibility to help them. So it's women's responsibility to be subservient, to assist, to live in the support of men. It's people of color's responsibility to live in the role of supporting white people. It's and economically, let's say this is another very clear example of this. It's the responsibility of those who are less economically affluent to continue to allow the benefit to the affluent few. And you see that in neighborhoods, and you see that globally, where you see countries like China, for example, and their relationship to the West, and so on and so forth. I won't go into a full analysis of that now. However, what you can do as a woman is recognize that men are going to ask you to take more responsibility than, or they're either going to overtly ask you, or they're going to expect subconsciously to take more responsibility for things than you technically should be. Take responsibility in a way that keeps you small and busy and squashed, and allows them to keep thriving, keep expanding, keep prospering. And so the thing that you can do at that point is to stop. Notice the story. The story here is, I'm 100% responsible for the children, or I'm responsible for your emotional world, and if you're upset, I have to walk around, on eggshells, making sure that you're happy or you're okay, or whatever it is. When you see that that's the story that's fueling your own behavior, then that's the point of choice. That's the point where you can stop and say, actually, I don't choose that anymore. I'm not going to take 100% responsibility for childcare. I'm not going to take any responsibility for your emotional world, because it's your emotional world, it's not mine. I'm not going to take responsibility for all of the other colleagues, the work of the other colleagues in my workplace that aren't pulling their weight, and continue to take pride in being the one that everybody goes to, because all that's doing is it's exhausting me, and it's meaning that everybody takes me for granted. So whatever it is, it's about recognizing who's taking responsibility in this space. So let's go to that the domestic situation, and let's talk about childcare and think about a household that's in a traditional gendered household and is in a heterosexual relationship. Who is taking responsibility for all of the domestic responsibilities and all of the childcare and everything? Is that responsibility, is that taking of that responsibility appropriate? Particularly if you're both working in a job outside of the home in a full-time capacity. If not, who in this room is not taking responsibility and why? And who is taking too much responsibility and why? And when you start to unpack that, and then you can sit in the discomfort of acknowledging that maybe somebody here has been taking advantage of somebody else. Somebody here has been just expecting somebody else to to do everything for them. And also the person who's been taking too much responsibility has been allowing that to perpetuate, and that's where you take responsibility